had planned the trip for weeks, thinking I had everything figured out. I packed my old, beaten-up backpack with essentials: tent, sleeping bag, extra clothes, canned food, a small stove, plenty of water, a first aid kit, a map, and a compass. I even brought a spare flashlight and batteries, because I had learned from past trips that running out of light in the middle of a forest was never a good idea. I left early on a Friday morning, taking my small hatchback through winding country roads until the asphalt thinned and the pavement ended. From there, I followed a dirt track that the GPS assured me would lead me deep into the backcountry, where few people came. That was exactly what I wanted. I needed solitude, some space away from the noise of my small apartment and the endless hum of the city. I wanted to be alone with nature, to hear the wind in the trees, the birds, the occasional rustle of deer in the underbrush. I was craving peace, or so I thought. The day started perfectly. The sun was bright, and the air was crisp, the way it always feels in the forest in late spring. I stopped twice along the dirt track to stretch and take pictures of the scenery. Towering pines, the occasional birch with its white bark, the distant hills covered in mist. By mid-afternoon, I found a clearing near a small creek, a spot that looked perfect for setting up camp. It wasn't on any marked trail. It was tucked back behind a rise and surrounded by thick undergrowth. I thought that made it ideal. I could set up my tent in the flat area, a few meters from the water with a good view in all directions. I wanted to make sure I could see any approaching wildlife, though I never expected much beyond squirrels or maybe a deer. I spent the next hour unpacking and pitching my tent. The ground was firm but not too hard, and I used rocks and sticks to help stake it down where the soil was loose. I laid out my sleeping bag inside and organized my gear meticulously. I even hung some food in a small bag from a tree branch, remembering that bears sometimes wandered this far in spring, though sightings were rare. I wanted to be careful. The last thing I wanted was an animal wandering into my camp at night. Once that was done, I walked along the creek, following it upstream for maybe half an hour. The water was clear and cold, the pebbles on the bottom glinting in the late afternoon sunlight. I found a spot where the water pooled in a deeper bend and sat there, watching tiny fish dart back and forth. It felt good, being so alone, away from the city and its noise. The air smelled like wet earth and pine, and I thought to myself that this was exactly what I needed. By the time I returned to camp, the sun was starting to dip behind the trees. I made a small fire in a stone ring I built, just enough to cook my dinner and keep warm as the temperature dropped. I had a simple meal, canned beans heated on my small stove, some bread and water. As I ate, I noticed movement near the edge of the clearing, just beyond the last trees. Could have been a rabbit or a deer or even just the wind moving branches. I told myself not to worry. This was the forest. Animals were normal here. Still, I stayed alert, scanning the shadows that stretched across the ground as the sun disappeared. Eventually, I finished eating, cleaned up, and added more wood to the fire, letting it burn brightly while I prepared to settle in for the night. I checked my flashlight, made sure my tent flap was secure, and crawled inside with my sleeping bag, feeling the first real chill of the evening. The night started normally. I could hear the occasional crack of the firewood and the far-off sound of water moving over rocks in the creek. There were other noises too, the rustle of leaves, the scurry of small animals, the calls of owls. Nothing unusual. I was sleepy, lulled by the steady sounds of the forest. Around midnight, I woke suddenly. Something had moved outside my tent, a sound that didn't belong to the wind or the creek. It was a low rustle, deliberate and soft, like someone or something was trying to step quietly on leaves and sticks. I froze, listening. My flashlight was just a few inches away. I considered reaching for it, but I didn't want to make a sudden movement that might alert whatever it was. I strained my ears. The sound was coming from the edge of the clearing, moving slowly, circling around my camp. My heart started beating faster. I told myself it was probably just a deer, but something about the rhythm didn't feel right. Deer don't usually stalk quietly, moving in circles. I slowly unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The fire had burned down to glowing embers, casting flickering shadows. I could see movement at the tree line, something dark, large, walking on two legs. I froze. I knew immediately that it wasn't an animal. Its movements were deliberate, cautious, almost patient. My mind raced. Could it be another camper? Trespassers? I had no idea. I hadn't seen another car or person for hours, and this area was very remote. I slowly reached for my backpack, my hand brushing against the flashlight. I turned it on, careful not to shine it directly toward the figure just yet. I clicked it on and pointed it toward the edge of the clearing. The light hit a man, or at least a human-sized figure, standing just beyond the tree line. He was wearing dark clothing, blending into the shadows. I couldn't see his face clearly. Panic surged through me. I knew that making noise could provoke him. I didn't have a phone signal out here, so calling for help was useless. I remembered my car was about 15 minutes away if I ran straight to it. But if he noticed me, I didn't know if I could make it. I had no weapon, nothing but my backpack and flashlight. I kept the beam on him. He didn't move. He seemed to be watching the faint glow of the embers. I tried to slow my breathing, thinking about my options. If he was alone, maybe he wouldn't attack, maybe he would leave. But I couldn't take that chance. I waited for what felt like an eternity. My mind raced with possibilities. Could I quietly pack up and slip into the trees behind the tent, hoping to make it to my car unnoticed? Could I grab a stick from the fire and prepare to defend myself? Every option felt risky. I decided the safest course was to remain still until I could assess him better. The figure didn't move closer. He didn't retreat. He just stayed there, watching, patient. The sounds of the forest seemed to recede. The only noises were the faint crackle of the dying fire and my own heartbeat. After what must have been an hour, he finally stepped back into the forest, disappearing into the darkness. I didn't move until I was sure he was gone. I didn't want to give away my position. When I finally did, I quietly packed my essential gear, tent, sleeping bag, food, leaving behind non-essentials. I moved as silently as I could, using the trees for cover. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear the creak now. I kept checking behind me. There was no sign of him. I made my way back along the dirt track toward my car, sticking to the shadows and keeping low. My hands were scratched by branches. My backpack snagged several times, but I didn't stop. The forest seemed unnaturally quiet, every rustle of leaves making me jump. After what felt like endless minutes, I finally saw the faint glint of headlights through the trees. Relief washed over me. I ran the last few meters, reaching the car and locking the doors behind me. I stayed there for a long time, breathing heavily, hands shaking, heart still racing. I didn't sleep that night. I drove straight back home, sticking to main roads, never once stopping. In the light of day, I thought back over what had happened. It had been terrifying, but I also realized that my careful preparation, having a backpack ready to go, a flashlight, a map, and knowledge of my surroundings, had given me options. I had survived because I stayed calm and thought through my actions rather than panicking. I learned that the forest could be unpredictable, that humans could be a danger as much as the wild animals I had expected. I never returned to that campsite. I reported the incident to local authorities, who said they had had reports of someone trespassing in the backcountry in the same area, but they never caught the man. I still go camping, but now I choose spots closer to marked trails. I carry extra safety equipment, pepper spray, a whistle, a GPS beacon, and I never camp alone in truly remote areas. The forest is beautiful, but I learned the hard way that beauty can hide danger. I know now that fear isn't always about monsters or wild animals. Sometimes it's just another human, watching, waiting, silent, in the shadows. I had been planning the trip for weeks. I had my tent, sleeping bag, stove, and enough supplies to last the weekend. It was supposed to be a simple escape from the city, a chance to clear my head and be alone with nature. I had chosen a spot deep in the forest, far from the main trails, where few people ever went. The forest was dense there, with thick pines and moss-covered ground, and I imagined it would be peaceful, maybe even calming. I didn't expect it to turn into one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. I arrived just as the sun was dipping behind the horizon, the light filtering through the tall trees in long golden beams. The forest was quiet, except for the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. I parked my car on the narrow dirt road leading to my camping spot, grabbed my backpack, and started the hike into the woods. The path was uneven, littered with roots and rocks, and the further I walked, the more the sounds of civilization faded away. By the time I reached the clearing I had picked, it was almost dark. The clearing was small but flat, surrounded by tall pines that blocked the wind. I set up my tent quickly, hammering the stakes into the hard soil, then laid out my sleeping bag and supplies. I decided to make a small fire, just enough to cook and provide warmth. The fire crackled and popped as I arranged the wood, the flames casting long, flickering shadows across the trees. At first, I felt a sense of satisfaction. I was alone, in a place where I could breathe and think, disconnected from everything. As night fell completely, the forest seemed to come alive in a way I hadn't anticipated. The sounds of insects and distant animals filled the air. The darkness was heavier than it looked during the day. Shapes moved in the shadows, and every rustle made me tense. I reminded myself that I was alone and careful, but a strange feeling settled in my chest, an unease I couldn't explain. I went to bed early, thinking that sleep would calm me, but it was almost impossible to rest. Every sound felt amplified. Twigs snapping, leaves brushing against each other, the distant howl of a coyote. It all seemed unnaturally close. I kept turning over, staring at the walls of my tent, trying to convince myself it was just my imagination. After what felt like hours, I finally drifted into a light, uneasy sleep. I woke to a sound I couldn't immediately place. At first, I thought it was the wind moving through the trees, but then I realized it was something else. It was the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps, crunching on the dry leaves outside my tent. My heart rate spiked and I froze. I knew I hadn't heard anyone arrive, and the nearest road was miles away. Whoever or whatever it was had to be in the forest before I had set up camp. I stayed perfectly still, trying to listen. The footsteps stopped. Then, after a long pause, they started again, moving in a slow circle around my tent. I could hear breathing now, soft but steady, almost human. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it an animal? A bear? Person? The forest was known for both, but the pace and sound felt deliberate, too controlled for an animal. I reached for my flashlight, careful not to make a noise. I slowly unzipped the tent just a little, enough to peek outside. The beam of light cut through the dark, and I swept it across the clearing. Nothing. The fire had mostly burned down, leaving a few embers glowing faintly. I didn't see anyone, but I could hear that breathing, moving, always just out of sight. I sat frozen for what felt like an eternity, thinking about my options. My phone had no signal. I couldn't call for help. I considered leaving the tent to confront whoever was out there, but every scenario in my head ended badly. I decided to stay put, hoping they would eventually leave. But they didn't. The footsteps circled again, closer this time, then stopped at the edge of the firelight. I could feel their presence, even though I couldn't see them. I remembered the knife I had packed for emergencies. I slowly slid my hand down to the handle, trying to stay calm. I told myself that most people in the forest were harmless, but the methodical movement of whoever was out there suggested otherwise. I stayed like that for hours, barely breathing, until the first faint light of dawn began to filter through the trees. As soon as it was light enough, I unzipped the tent fully and shone my flashlight around, hoping the night's visitor had gone. The clearing looked empty, but I noticed something that made my stomach sink. Footprints in the soft soil around my tent. They were human, large, and heavy, circling the perimeter multiple times. Whoever had been there had watched me all night. I packed up quickly, leaving the fire and most of my gear behind. My pace was fast, almost running, but I forced myself to stay alert. The forest felt different in the morning, still quiet but with an underlying tension. Every sound made me jump. I kept scanning the treeline, certain I would see someone following me. The hike back to the car was grueling. My legs were tired, my back ached from the heavy pack, but the fear drove me forward. When I finally reached the dirt road and saw my car, relief washed over me. I jumped in, locked the doors, and started the engine. I didn't stop to look back. I drove as fast as I could, the forest disappearing behind me. Even after I reached the main road and the safety of civilization, I kept checking the rearview mirror. I was terrified that someone would emerge from the trees, but there was nothing. In the days that followed, I tried to rationalize what had happened. The footprints were clearly human. Someone had been watching me, but why? The area wasn't popular, and I hadn't seen anyone else on my way in. I thought about reporting it to the park authorities, but I wasn't sure what I could say. Without proof or identification, it would just sound like a scary story. I considered that it could have been a local who knew the forest well, someone who used it to hunt or camp secretly. The thought made me uneasy. Months passed, and the memory didn't fade. Every time I planned a hike or camping trip, a part of me remembered that night. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sensation that someone could be out there again. But I also learned something important about preparation and awareness. I started carrying more than just a basic survival kit. Pepper spray, a whistle, a backup phone, and always letting someone know exactly where I was going. I became more cautious, more aware of my surroundings. Eventually, I went camping again, but never in the deep, isolated parts of the forest. I chose well-known sites, places with other people around, and stayed close to roads. I realized that nature was beautiful, but it was also unpredictable. Not every danger came from wild animals or natural hazards. Sometimes, the threat was human, hidden in the shadows. I never saw that person again, but the experience stayed with me, a constant reminder of the importance of vigilance, preparation, and respect for the wilderness. In the end, the trip taught me more than any peaceful weekend could have. I learned how to stay calm under fear, how to think critically when alone and vulnerable, and how to protect myself without panic. I kept a mental map of every detail of that clearing, every tree, every footprint, and every sound, so if I ever returned, I would not be caught off guard. It changed the way I approached every outdoor adventure after that. And though the memory still sends a shiver down my spine, I am grateful that I survived without harm and carried home the lessons of that terrifying night. I had been looking forward to this camping trip for months. The idea of leaving behind the noise of the city, the constant hum of traffic, and the endless emails was almost intoxicating. I needed it, not just a weekend escape, but a chance to disconnect completely. I packed my gear carefully, checking everything twice. The tent, sleeping bag, first aid kit, food, extra water, flashlight, batteries, fire starter, a small folding stove, and a map of the area. I had chosen a remote section of the forest known for its hiking trails and sparse visitors, thinking it would be perfect for solitude. I had no intention of seeing anyone else. I arrived at the trailhead in the late afternoon. The sun was already lowering behind the hills, casting long golden shadows across the dirt road and the scattered pine trees that marked the entrance to the wilderness. The air smelled crisp and earthy, a mixture of pine sap, wet soil, and decaying leaves. It was the kind of smell that immediately made you feel alert, aware, and slightly cautious. I carried my backpack over my shoulders, feeling the weight settle on me. The first mile of the trail was easy, gentle slopes and soft earth under my boots. Birds called out to one another, rustling in the underbrush. I breathed in deeply, feeling the tension from the past few weeks ease just a little. As I hiked further, the trail narrowed, and the forest became denser. The trees were taller here, their trunks thick with moss, and the ground was uneven, littered with roots and fallen branches. Every now and then, I had to step over logs or navigate around small creeks that cut across the trail. The sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating shifting patterns on the ground. I reminded myself to keep track of time. I wanted to reach a clearing I had spotted on the map before nightfall. My plan was to set up camp there, near a small creek, which I thought would give me both water and a safe, open space to keep my tent away from too many trees. About 3 miles in, I found the clearing. It was larger than I expected, almost a natural bowl surrounded by trees. The ground was firm and dry in most places, though the edges of the clearing were damp from a recent rain. There were stones arranged as though someone had made a fire pit here before, so I decided to use that as my cooking area. I set down my pack, stretched my shoulders, and took a long sip of water from my bottle. Everything seemed perfect. I started to unpack and organize my space. Tent first, sleeping bag, then stove and food. I even found some dry wood nearby and piled it up for the night. As the sun sank lower, the forest changed. The shadows deepened, and the wind shifted, bringing a colder bite. The birds fell silent. I noticed a faint rustling in the underbrush around the clearing. At first, I thought it was just small animals, squirrels or rabbits moving through the leaves. But then I saw movement that seemed too large for the small creatures. Something was out there. Maybe a deer, I thought, trying to reassure myself. I felt my stomach tighten, a familiar tension that comes when you know you are alone in the woods and something unseen is nearby. I decided to light a small fire. Flames licked at the stacked wood, crackling and giving off warmth and light. I kept the fire modest but enough to see the clearing around me. The rustling continued, closer now, around the edges of the clearing. My mind tried to reason. It was probably just the wind moving branches or an animal avoiding me. But the sound had a rhythm to it, deliberate, cautious, almost like it was circling. I couldn't see anything through the darkening forest. My flashlight lay on the ground next to my pack, and I considered taking it out, but something in me wanted to wait. I wanted to feel the night as it was, not through an artificial beam of light. The firelight flickered, and I saw shadows move among the trees. My pulse quickened. I reminded myself of basic safety. Stay calm, don't run, keep the fire going. I checked my knife, strapped it to my belt, just in case. The rustling stopped, then started again, closer. My ears strained to catch every sound. The snap of twigs, the brushing of leaves. I realized that whatever it wasn't a deer. The steps were too heavy, too measured, and too quiet at the same time. I sat very still, trying to stay downwind, trying to make myself invisible. I didn't want to provoke anything, and I didn't want to attract attention unnecessarily. Time seemed to stretch. The fire popped, sending sparks into the air. I stared into the darkness, eyes trying to pierce the shadows beyond the fire's edge. Suddenly, something moved at the far edge of the clearing. I caught a glimpse of a figure, or maybe it was just a tree shaped oddly by the moonlight, but it moved again. This time, I was certain it wasn't an inanimate object. My stomach churned with fear, the kind of primal fear that doesn't come from stories, but from knowing you are completely exposed and entirely alone. I reached slowly for my flashlight, trying to control my breathing so I wouldn't give away my position. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the edge of the tree line. Nothing, just the forest, empty and silent. I waited. The rustling stopped again, as though whatever was there had frozen. Night fell fully. The fire had died down to embers, and the darkness became dense, almost physical. The stars shone above, but the forest swallowed most of the light. I sat close to my backpack, my knife ready, listening. Hours passed, or maybe it was only minutes. Everything seemed to merge into one long stretch of tense quiet. Then I heard it again, the softest sound of movement, almost a whisper of footsteps on dry leaves. It wasn't a deer. I was sure of it. My mind raced through possibilities. A bear? A mountain lion? A human? All of them dangerous in their own way. I considered leaving, hiking back the 3 miles in the dark. But my backpack was heavy, my legs tired, and I had no guarantee of finding the trail easily at night. I made a decision. I stayed low, kept the fire going, and tried to observe. Then I saw it clearer this time. A large shape moving slowly along the edge of the clearing. A human figure, I realized, but hunched, cautious, careful not to make noise. My heart pounded. I wasn't carrying a gun, only a knife. My phone had no service. I had no way to call for help. I had underestimated the isolation. I thought back to all the warnings I had ignored about camping in remote areas alone. This was the reality now, and I had to survive the night. I had been planning this camping trip for months. I wanted to get far away from everything. Far from the noise, far from the people, far from the constant demands of work and life. I had been feeling restless for weeks, like something was pressing down on me, and I knew I needed this trip. I packed everything carefully, making lists, checking items twice. My tent was new, my sleeping bag was thick and warm, my backpack was stuffed with enough food, water, and supplies to last 3 days, although the trip was supposed to be just 2 nights. I brought extra batteries, a small stove, a first aid kit, and a flashlight with a backup. I wanted to be prepared for anything because I knew the wilderness could be unforgiving if you weren't careful. I drove for hours, leaving the city behind, passing small towns that thinned out into empty roads. Eventually, I turned onto a dirt track that led into the forest. The trees grew taller, denser, and older the further I went. Their branches arched overhead like a tunnel, filtering the sunlight into dull green shades. It felt quiet in a way that was almost unnatural. There were no birds, no insects buzzing near the car, just the sound of tires crunching over loose gravel. I parked at a small clearing that looked perfect for camping. Flat ground, some space for a fire pit, a small creek running a short distance away. I unloaded my gear slowly, methodically. I set up my tent, hammered in the stakes, checked the seams, and made sure the sleeping bag was dry and ready. I unpacked my stove and small pot and gathered firewood from around the clearing. I didn't want to leave anything unprepared, and yet as the day progressed, I started feeling a little uneasy. The forest had its own silence, the kind that presses against your ears. Every small noise, twigs snapping, leaves rustling, the creek bubbling, sounded sharper, more pronounced. I reminded myself that I was alone, and that I had been camping plenty of times before. I had nothing to fear. The first night came. I ate a small dinner of canned beans heated over the stove, washed it down with water from my bottle, and then prepared my small fire. The flames crackled, throwing shadows over the clearing. It was peaceful at first, the kind of peace that fills you after a long day of hiking and fresh air. I sat on a log and stared into the fire. The forest around me was dark, the trees massive black shapes against the dim light of the moon. I felt the comfort of isolation at first, but slowly, a creeping unease began to grow. The sounds were not wrong exactly, but the way they came and went, random, sharp, and close, made me stiffen with every noise. It started with a snap, a small twig breaking somewhere near the edge of the clearing. I froze. My eyes scanned the darkness beyond the firelight, straining to see. There was nothing, just the trees, quiet again. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon. I tried to focus on the fire, on the warmth in front of me. Then another snap, louder, closer. My heart started beating faster. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the trees. I could see nothing but shadow and the occasional glint of leaves in the moonlight. I spent the next hour watching the edges of the clearing, fire between me and the darkness, flashlight scanning every few seconds. Nothing moved, nothing appeared. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The forest has its own rules, its own rhythms, and I was breaking them simply by being there. The wind shifted, carrying a faint rustling from deeper in the woods. My stomach tightened. Around midnight, I decided I should go to bed. I crawled into my tent, zipped it closed, and turned off my flashlight. The walls of the tent were thin, letting in every small sound. At first, I tried to sleep, but every snap, every rustle, every whisper of leaves made me flinch. The creek sounded louder in the night, and I could hear small feet running over the underbrush farther out. My mind was spinning scenarios, none of them good. I imagined someone lost in the woods wandering close to my camp, or worse, an animal with a predatory curiosity. I tried to reason with myself. I was miles from any trail. No one should be here, but reason has a hard time keeping pace with fear in the middle of the night. Then I heard it, a deliberate sound this time, not random. A crunch of leaves, slow, steady, moving around the edge of my clearing. My heart nearly stopped. I froze, clutching my flashlight. My mind raced through all the possibilities. A bear? A deer? A person? A pack of coyotes? I strained my ears. The sound stopped for a moment, then started again. I realized it was circling the clearing, moving closer to my fire. I didn't move. I didn't breathe more than I had to. My flashlight was inside the tent, out of reach. The sounds grew closer, until finally I could hear something walking on the dirt near the edge of the firelight. Heavy, deliberate steps. Something was definitely there. I forced myself not to panic, thinking of all the advice I had read. Stay calm. Make yourself known. Don't run blindly. But I also remembered what people had said about camping alone in remote areas. If it was a human, they could be dangerous. I considered grabbing my small hunting knife, but I was trapped in the tent. All I could do was wait and listen. The steps stopped. There was a pause so tense I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then I heard a sound I had not expected. A low, deliberate rustling of brush, as if someone or something was moving deliberately through undergrowth, trying to stay quiet but failing. I stayed still, waiting for it to reveal itself. The firelight threw shadows, and I could just make out a figure at the far edge of the clearing. At first, I thought it was an animal, but it moved too deliberately, and the silhouette was upright, human-shaped. My stomach dropped. I debated my options. I could zip the tent and hope it left. I could try to scare it off by shouting or throwing something, but I wasn't sure if that would provoke it. The figure moved closer, slow and careful, like it was testing me. My mind raced through escape options. My car was parked 100 meters away, across the clearing. I could try to run, but the darkness and my adrenaline would make it easy to trip. I felt trapped. I remembered my backpack. It was right next to me in the tent. I grabbed my small flashlight, turned it on, and pointed it at the edge of the opening. The figure froze, then slowly started to move away. Relief surged through me, but it was mixed with terror. Whoever or whatever it hadn't come any closer, and now it seemed to retreat into the shadows. I stayed in the tent the rest of the night, unable to sleep, listening to every sound. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves kept me on edge. I counted the hours until dawn, which seemed impossibly far away. Morning came with a weak, pale light filtering through the trees. I unzipped the tent and peered outside. The clearing looked normal, peaceful even, with sunlight hitting the tops of trees and the creek sparkling. I searched around carefully, looking for tracks, signs of what had been there. There were footprints, human, adult size, circling the clearing, careful but deliberate. Whoever had come near my camp had left without confrontation. I felt shaken, but also alive in a way I hadn't before. I packed up quickly, breaking camp with an urgency I didn't entirely understand. I hiked back to my car cautiously, scanning the forest around me. The sun was higher now, and I could see more of the path. I wondered about the person who had come near my camp. Were they a hiker like me just passing through? Or had they been watching me for a while, waiting for the right moment? I would never know. The thought unsettled me, but I also felt a strange sense of accomplishment. I had survived the night, stayed calm, and had taken careful precautions that probably kept me safe. When I reached the car, I locked the doors immediately and started the engine. Driving away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a figure watching me from the treeline. But there was nothing, just the quiet forest fading behind me. By the time I reached the main road, I started to feel more normal again, the fear of the night receding into a tense memory. I learned a lot from that trip. I learned to respect the forest, its quiet, its unpredictability, and its power. I learned that fear can sharpen your senses and make you hyper-aware, but that you also have to balance it with reason and caution. I learned that preparation matters. Having supplies, knowing your surroundings, and keeping your wits about you can make all the difference. Most importantly, I learned that the wilderness can be dangerous in ways you don't anticipate, and that surviving is often about patience, observation, and careful action. Even now, years later, I think about that night sometimes. The memory is vivid. The snap of the twig, the darkness pressing down, the human-shaped shadow at the edge of my firelight. It still makes my stomach tighten, but it also reminds me of the strength that comes from staying calm, being prepared, and taking deliberate action when fear grips you. The ending was clear because I made it clear. I got out, I survived, and I carried the lesson with me. I had always loved camping alone. There was something about the quiet of the forest, the way the wind whispered through the pines, and the smell of wet earth after rain that calmed me in a way the city never could. I had done dozens of solo trips before, each one a test of my own endurance and planning, but nothing I had done had prepared me for what happened that weekend. I had chosen a small, remote forest reserve in the northern part of the state, one that few people went to because it was hard to access. The drive-in was rough, a narrow dirt road full of potholes, bordered by dense trees that blocked most of the sunlight. My old truck rattled along, tires crunching over gravel, and I felt a mix of anticipation and the familiar thrill that always came with entering an untouched wilderness. I parked near a small clearing I had scouted on a map. The clearing was just big enough for my tent, a little fire pit I had built myself, and my pack. The forest around it was thick, the kind where visibility dropped to just a few feet once you stepped away from the open space. I set up my tent first, hammering in the stakes with care. I always made sure my tent was secure. Rain or wind could come at any time in that part of the forest. Once it was up, I laid out my sleeping bag, stove, and food supplies. I unpacked methodically, checking each item against my mental list: water, matches, knife, flashlight, first aid kit, extra clothing, and of course, the map and compass. By the time I had everything organized, the sun was already low. It filtered through the trees in long, gold-tinged beams, casting shadows that stretched across the ground. I built a fire pit in the center of the clearing, carefully arranging stones I found nearby. The first strike of the match sparked, and the dry leaves I had gathered caught fire. Smoke rose and drifted lazily through the trees. I sat by the fire for a long time, just watching the flames and listening. The forest was alive with subtle sounds. A distant bird calling, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush, the whisper of the wind through the pines. Night fell faster than I expected. The temperature dropped quickly, and the air became damp with moisture. I cooked a simple meal on my portable stove: dehydrated pasta and a little tuna. Eating alone, I felt the kind of peace that comes from being completely cut off from the world. After dinner, I cleaned up, making sure to pack away food and scraps to avoid attracting animals. Bears were known to wander in these parts, and I had been careful not to leave any scent trails that might bring one too close. Once everything was secure, I settled into my tent with my flashlight and a small notebook. I wrote about the day, the scenery, and the quiet sense of isolation that I always felt in the forest. Then I zipped up my sleeping bag and lay down. Sleep didn't come immediately. My mind wandered, as it always did when I was alone in the wilderness. I thought about the paths I would take tomorrow, the small creek I wanted to explore, and the old logging trail I had found on my map. Eventually, the rhythmic sound of the wind through the trees and the occasional crack of a distant branch eased me into a light sleep. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of something large moving outside the tent. At first, I thought it was just the wind knocking over branches, but then I heard the crunch of leaves under heavy feet. My heart rate spiked. I stayed perfectly still, listening. The sound stopped for a moment, then started again, closer this time. I realized it wasn't an animal I had heard before. Bears were mostly quiet unless they were feeding, and the rhythm of these steps was too deliberate, too heavy. My mind raced. Someone or something was moving through the clearing. I kept my flashlight off, afraid to draw attention. My hands were shaking slightly as I reached for the small folding knife I kept tucked under my sleeping bag. I knew staying in the tent would keep me mostly hidden, but I also knew that if whoever or whatever it was decided to investigate, my position wouldn't be secret for long. The steps stopped again, just beyond the edge of the clearing. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense, waiting. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of a branch snapping very close to the tent. My stomach dropped. I tried to calm myself. I reminded myself I had planned for emergencies. I had a whistle attached to my pack that could carry a sound for miles. I had a small canister of bear spray. I had my phone, though signal was weak at best. The question was whether I should wait and see, try to scare off whoever it was, or make a break for my truck. I decided the tent was not the safest place. I slipped out quietly, my knife in one hand and my flashlight in the other, careful to step softly on the soft forest floor. The clearing was darker than I expected. The fire I had left smoldering nearly extinguished. My flashlight beam cut a narrow path through the blackness. There was no one in sight, but footprints in the dirt betrayed the recent presence of something heavy. They were too large to be my own, and the spacing suggested a tall person. My pulse was thundering in my ears as I crouched low, moving slowly toward the truck. Each step I took seemed to echo too loudly in the silence. I reached the edge of the clearing and paused, scanning the forest. My light caught a figure moving between trees, staying in shadows, avoiding open ground. I realized then that whoever was out here had been watching me. Panic surged, but I forced myself to think clearly. My plan was simple: get to the truck, lock the doors, and drive out. The road wasn't far, just a 5-minute sprint through the brush if I stayed low and careful. I moved as quietly as I could, feeling the uneven ground beneath my feet, the cold, damp soil soaking through my thin shoes. Every branch that snapped underfoot made my heart leap. Halfway to the truck, I tripped over a root and fell forward, scraping my palms. The sound seemed deafening. I scrambled up, looking back. A shadow flitted between trees, moving faster than I expected. Whoever it was had noticed me. My mind screamed to run, but I had to stay quiet. I dropped to the ground again, crawling, using the underbrush as cover. I made it to the truck and yanked the door open. My hands shook as I locked the doors and started the engine. The low rumble of the motor seemed to echo through the clearing. I glanced in the side mirror, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees, just watching. Then it was gone. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I shifted into drive and slowly backed onto the dirt road, scanning constantly for movement. The drive back was tense, every sound from the forest making me flinch. Branches scraping against the truck, the occasional rustle in the undergrowth, the wind itself. It all felt like it could hide someone following me. But the road was narrow, and the truck was loud, and after a few minutes I started to feel a tiny bit of relief. I hadn't been chased, at least not yet. I stayed on the main road until I reached the highway, my hands still white from gripping the wheel so tightly. By the time I stopped at a small rest area several miles away, my body was exhausted. I kept checking over my shoulder, paranoid that someone had followed me. When I finally sat down on a bench, I allowed myself to breathe. I called the local ranger station and explained what had happened. They listened, asked questions, and eventually promised to send someone to check the area. They didn't promise to find whoever or whatever, it was just to investigate. I stayed in the rest area until daylight. Sleep was impossible, though I tried, curling into myself on the bench with a blanket from my pack. When the sun rose, I drove straight home, never looking back. Once inside, I locked every door and window, and for days, I kept checking the news for anything about break-ins or people spotted in the forest. Nothing came up. I never returned to that forest. The memory of being alone, knowing someone had been watching me, following me, was too vivid. I stayed in campgrounds with other people after that, always choosing popular trails with other hikers around. It wasn't the fear of being hurt that changed me. It was the knowledge that someone had been out there, close enough to make me feel helpless, yet unseen, and that they could come back if they wanted to. The experience taught me how fragile safety could be in the wilderness, how quickly a peaceful night could turn into a fight for survival. And it made me respect the forest, not as a place of adventure, but as a space where caution had to be constant and trust had to be measured. Even now, years later, I sometimes drive past that area and glance at the trees, still feeling the same tight, cold knot in my stomach I felt that night. I remember the way the darkness pressed down, how every small sound was magnified, how the weight of the unknown can feel heavier than anything physical. But I also remember the clarity that came from surviving it, the lessons about preparation, awareness, and the importance of never underestimating how real danger can become when you are alone in the wilderness. I came home, safe, but forever changed, carrying with me the memory of a night when the forest felt alive in a way I had never experienced before. I had been planning this solo camping trip for months. It wasn't that I had any illusions of being some kind of survival expert. Far from it, but I liked the idea of testing myself, of getting away from everything, from the noise and responsibilities of daily life. I had spent days researching a secluded spot deep in the forest, far from the usual trails, where no one came, where it felt like the wilderness stretched endlessly. My backpack was heavy with all the essentials: tent, sleeping bag, food for a week, water purification tablets, a portable stove, a first aid kit, a compass, maps, a flashlight with extra batteries, and a sturdy knife. I thought I had covered everything. I thought I was prepared. The drive there had been long and winding, the kind of roads that get smaller and rougher the further you go, until eventually, the GPS signal disappears completely and the map in your hand is the only guide you have. I reached the spot by late afternoon. The forest was dense, the trees tall and close together, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into greenish gold patches on the forest floor. There was a small clearing where I decided to set up my tent, near a narrow creek whose water looked clear and cold. The place was perfect, secluded, quiet, and untouched, or so it seemed. I spent the first hour setting up my camp carefully. The tent was pitched on slightly elevated ground, and I cleared the area of any sticks or stones that might make sleeping uncomfortable. I stacked my firewood neatly a few feet from the tent and dug a small fire pit, lining it with stones I found nearby. The sounds of the forest were calm at first, birds chirping, the rustling of leaves in a gentle breeze, the faint murmur of the creek. But as the sun sank lower, the quiet began to take on a different tone. Shadows lengthened and the forest seemed to press closer, like it was observing me. I decided to cook my first meal. I had brought dehydrated meals that only needed boiling water. As I boiled the water over the small flame, I noticed the occasional crack of a branch underfoot somewhere deeper in the trees. At first, I assumed it was an animal. The forest was full of wildlife: deer, raccoons, squirrels. Nothing to worry about. Still, there was something in the pattern of the sounds that made me uneasy. The cracking wasn't random. It was measured, deliberate, but I dismissed it. I was alone, and my mind was trying to imagine danger where there was none. Night fell faster than I expected. The forest changed completely. The comforting green glow of daytime was replaced by inky blackness, pierced only by the light of the moon and the occasional reflection off the creek. I ate quickly, washed up, and crawled into my sleeping bag, feeling the cool dampness of the forest floor beneath me. I had left the tent flap partially open to hear the sounds of the night, to feel the connection to the wilderness. That's when the first real sign that something was off occurred. I heard it before I saw it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps moving carefully through the underbrush. Not the fast, random movement of an animal, but slow, cautious, deliberate. The footsteps stopped and started, sometimes approaching, sometimes retreating. I froze. My mind raced. There was no one else supposed to be in this part of the forest. I didn't have cell service to call for help. My flashlight was at the edge of my reach inside the tent. I wanted to convince myself it was just my imagination, that the wind had shifted branches in a way that sounded like someone walking. But the sound was too precise, too intentional. I lay as still as I could, barely breathing. The footsteps stopped close to my tent. I could hear the faint snap of twigs and the soft crush of leaves. My hands shook as I reached for my knife, but I didn't want to make a sudden move that might reveal my presence. I kept my body low, pressed into the sleeping bag, and tried to make myself small. The sounds lingered for what felt like an eternity, circling around my camp. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence returned, but it was different now, heavier, almost oppressive. Sleep was impossible. I spent the night listening intently, every crack and rustle making my heart pound. Every time I thought I heard someone moving closer, my body tensed. At one point, I thought I heard whispering, but it was probably just the wind or the creek. When morning came, I was exhausted, stiff and jittery, but alive. I spent the daylight hours trying to convince myself that the events of the night had been my imagination. I decided to explore the area cautiously, staying close to the creek. The forest seemed harmless in daylight. Birds sang, squirrels scurried along the branches. The sunlight filtered through the canopy. I convinced myself it was safe enough to move around. That evening, I made sure to reinforce my tent and my fire pit, and I set up a perimeter with small tripwires made of string and sticks that would alert me if anyone, or anything, entered my camp. I had seen survival videos that suggested this, and I figured it was better than nothing. The second night was worse. I had barely slept when I heard it again. The footsteps, precise, deliberate, moving slowly around my camp. But this time, there were other sounds. Faint snapping of larger branches, the dragging of something along the forest floor. I sat up and shone my flashlight outside the tent, trying to catch a glimpse. Nothing, just shadows, trees, and the darkness beyond. My stomach turned to ice. Whoever or whatever was out there knew I was alone. The night stretched endlessly. I stayed in my sleeping bag, knife in hand, flashlight ready. The movements continued sporadically, sometimes near, sometimes farther away, circling. My mind started racing through possibilities. A lost hiker? Unlikely. They would have shown themselves by now. A hunter? Possibly. But it was hunting season and there was no other sign of people nearby. A criminal hiding out? The thought made my blood run cold. I realized that I had no real way to defend myself, that the wilderness offered cover to anyone with ill intent. Morning came and I knew I couldn't stay in the same spot. I packed my things quickly, trying not to leave anything behind that could slow me down. I decided to head back toward the trail I had used to enter the forest, even though it meant leaving my carefully chosen spot behind. I moved cautiously, keeping my ears open for any sounds of movement. Every branch snapping, every rustle of leaves made me jump. My senses were heightened to a painful degree. I couldn't afford to relax, not for a second. It took hours to retrace my path. I kept imagining eyes following me, footsteps matching my own, shadows moving in the corners of my vision. The forest, which had seemed serene and inviting when I arrived, now felt hostile, alien. Every tree was a potential hiding spot. Every bush could conceal someone waiting to ambush me. My backpack grew heavier with each step, my energy drained by fear and tension. I kept reminding myself that I was strong, capable, and that I had survived the first night. But the fear never left. By mid-afternoon, I finally reached the rough trail that led back to the main road. Relief washed over me, but I stayed alert. I walked quickly, trying to put as much distance as possible between myself and the forest. The footsteps had not returned, but I didn't trust the quiet. I felt like the forest had eyes everywhere, that it remembered me, that the feeling of being watched would never fully leave me. Eventually, I emerged onto a dirt road that led to the main highway. I saw cars passing by, people going about their lives, unaware of what had been happening just a few miles into the trees. I felt a wave of safety I hadn't felt in 2 nights. I stopped to catch my breath, checking over my shoulder one last time before heading to the nearest gas station to call someone. Anyone, to let them know I was okay. Looking back, I realized how close I had come to being in serious danger. The forest was beautiful, serene, and inviting, but also unpredictable, and human intentions could be hidden under its quiet exterior. My preparations had saved me in part, but I understood that being alert, cautious, and ready to move at a moment's notice had been what truly kept me safe. I vowed never to take isolation lightly, never to assume the wilderness was only about peaceful solitude. It was a place of balance, and that balance could tilt in ways I had not anticipated. I never went back to that particular spot. I continued to camp and hike, but always in areas where there were other people, trails marked on maps, and cell service. I carried more tools for self-defense and stayed vigilant. I told myself that fear was a part of being alive, but the memory of those 2 nights in the forest, the feeling of footsteps circling my camp, the oppressive silence of the dark trees, stayed with me. I had learned the hard way that the wilderness could be as dangerous as it was beautiful. and that being alone was not just a test of endurance. It was a test of awareness, preparation, and respect for the unknown that walked silently around me. I had been planning this camping trip for months, obsessively checking the weather, mapping out routes, and gathering all the supplies I thought I would need. I wanted isolation, a chance to escape the constant hum of the city, the sirens, the fluorescent lights, and the endless schedules. I needed silence. I needed the raw feel of the forest under my feet and the cold air in my lungs. I had chosen a spot in a national forest that wasn't heavily trafficked. The trailhead was about 2 hours from the nearest town, and the last stretch was a narrow dirt road that wound through dense trees, over small streams, and finally ended at a small clearing near a river. The descriptions online promised solitude, a place where a person could feel completely disconnected from the rest of the world. That's exactly what I wanted. I started my drive early in the morning, before the sun had risen. The air was crisp, and a light frost clung to the edges of the trees lining the road. I drove slowly, partly because the road was narrow and partly because I wanted to take in the scenery. It felt like a preview of what was to come. The deeper I went into the forest, the quieter everything became. Birds chirped occasionally, and the wind rustled the tops of the pines, but it wasn't loud enough to mask the sense that I was leaving the world behind. When I finally reached the trailhead, I parked my car and took a moment to look at the forest ahead. The trees were thick, dark, and imposing. The path itself was narrow and uneven, covered in fallen leaves, rocks, and twisted roots. I adjusted my backpack, which I had packed carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small stove, a first aid kit, flashlight, and an assortment of knives and tools. I wanted to be prepared for anything because being unprepared in a forest this deep could be dangerous. I had read enough survival stories online to know that a single misstep could lead to serious consequences. I started down the trail, and immediately, the quiet of the forest was overwhelming. No cars, no people, no hum of electricity. Just the sound of my boots on the uneven path and the occasional snap of a twig somewhere off the trail. The further I walked, the heavier the silence became, as though the trees themselves were pressing in around me. The air was damp and smelled faintly of earth and decaying leaves. I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and unease, a creeping sense that the isolation I had sought could be more intense than I had imagined. About 3 hours into the hike, I reached the clearing by the river. It was more beautiful than I had expected, wide, flat ground, the river running swiftly but shallowly, clear water tumbling over rocks, reflecting the late afternoon sun in sharp, bright flashes. I picked a spot for my tent, a slightly raised area to avoid potential flooding if the river rose overnight. I set up the tent quickly, securing it tightly, then unpacked my stove and some food. I wanted to make sure I had something warm before night fell, especially because it was already starting to get cooler. By the time I finished eating, the sun had dipped low behind the trees, and shadows stretched across the clearing. I had my flashlight ready, the batteries fresh, and I had double-checked the stove and my fire-starting supplies. I wanted light, warmth, and the ability to signal for help if necessary. I had my phone fully charged, but I didn't expect much service this deep in the forest. I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail all day, and I liked it that way. I wanted to be alone, yet the solitude was heavier now, more intense than I had anticipated. Night fell quickly. The forest became a wall of black, the river reflecting only the faint light of the stars above. I lit a small fire near the edge of the clearing, far enough from the tent to be safe but close enough to provide warmth and light. I watched the flames flicker and listened to the river, feeling a strange mix of calm and tension. The forest was alive with sounds. Rustling leaves, snapping twigs, the occasional distant call of an animal. Each sound seemed amplified in the darkness. I kept my flashlight within reach and the knives in my backpack. I had chosen this location partly because it was secluded, but now I realized that seclusion had its dangers too. Around midnight, I woke to a noise. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. Something heavy, moving through the underbrush. I froze, listening. The sound came again, closer this time, A deliberate rustling, the snapping of branches, soft but distinct footsteps. My heart rate increased. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the darkness beyond the clearing. Nothing. I listened again. The sound wasn't consistent. It would pause, then start again, like something or someone was testing my awareness. I realized immediately that I was not just hearing an animal. There was a weight, a carefulness in the movement that suggested something human-sized, moving slowly and deliberately. I stayed still for what felt like an hour, though it could have been minutes. I kept my flashlight on, sweeping the trees, the riverbank, the areas around the clearing. Nothing appeared. I tried to calm myself, reasoning that maybe it was just a deer or a bear, but the sound had a pattern, a deliberateness that no animal I knew could replicate. My chest was tight, my hands clammy, and every instinct told me that the safety I had felt during the day was gone. I decided to remain in the tent, quietly gathering my food, water, and gear inside. I zipped the tent shut and sat against the wall, listening. The rustling didn't come right up to the tent, but I could hear it moving around the perimeter of the clearing, moving with purpose. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that someone could be nearby, someone following the trail I had taken. I checked my phone, no signal, but I had a small whistle in my pocket. Not a lot of protection, but maybe enough to scare someone off. Time passed slowly. The sounds continued sporadically. Sometimes I would hear the snap of a branch far away. Sometimes closer, always moving, always deliberate. Couldn't sleep. I could only listen, tense, imagining what could happen if someone came closer. The forest that had felt liberating during the day now felt threatening. Each tree a potential hiding place, each shadow a threat. Around 3 in the morning, I finally heard the sound of footsteps approaching the tent directly. I froze, listening to the crunch of leaves and dirt beneath them. They stopped suddenly, as if the person had realized I was aware. I gripped the whistle, my knuckles white. The footsteps receded slightly, then stopped again, near the edge of the clearing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I waited. Then the quiet stretched, longer than anything I had experienced before. At dawn, the footsteps had disappeared. The forest was quiet again, and the light of morning revealed the clearing in its true form, beautiful, serene, as though nothing had happened. I carefully unzipped the tent and looked around. There were no obvious signs of anyone being there. No footprints leading to the tent, no discarded items, no disturbed underbrush. The forest looked untouched, but I knew what I had heard. I decided I couldn't stay. I packed up quickly, scanning the surroundings constantly, my adrenaline high. I moved cautiously along the trail, aware of every sound. My legs ached, my back was stiff, but I kept moving, driven by a mix of fear and the need to reach safety. The trail felt endless, the forest thick, the shadows long. I kept my flashlight ready, although the sun was rising, casting the trees in golden light. By mid-morning, I reached my car. I locked the doors immediately and sat inside, breathing heavily. The safety of metal and glass felt surreal after the tension of the night. I drove slowly back towards civilization, constantly checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. I didn't see anyone, but I didn't stop watching until I was on the main highway. Later, after I had returned home and slept for a long, exhausted stretch, I thought about what had happened. I realized that I had been lucky. Lucky to have chosen a clearing that gave me visibility. Lucky that the person didn't try to enter my tent. Lucky that I had trusted my instincts. I never figured out who or what had been in the forest that night, and I never went back. I sold most of my camping gear and limited my trips to areas where other people were nearby. The fear I had felt was real, tangible, and lingering. The forest was no longer a place of freedom. It was a place of constant awareness, where every rustle could be a threat. The lesson I carried was clear. Isolation comes with dangers that no amount of preparation can entirely remove. Even when you think you are ready, even when you have mapped every route and packed every tool, the unpredictability of human presence or intent can turn a peaceful night into something terrifying. I survived, and that survival felt earned, a result of caution, observation, and respect for the unknown in the world around me. I never camped alone again, never in the same way, and the memory of that night in the forest, the tension, the sounds, the sense of being watched, remained with me vivid and clear for years afterward. I had been planning this camping trip for months, obsessively checking the weather, mapping out routes, and gathering all the supplies I thought I would need. I wanted isolation, a chance to escape the constant hum of the city, the sirens, the fluorescent lights, and the endless schedules. I needed silence. I needed the raw feel of the forest under my feet and the cold air in my lungs. I had chosen a spot in a national forest that wasn't heavily trafficked. The trailhead was about 2 hours from the nearest town, and the last stretch was a narrow dirt road that wound through dense trees, over small streams, and finally ended at a small clearing near a river. The descriptions online promised solitude, a place where a person could feel completely disconnected from the rest of the world. That's exactly what I wanted. I started my drive early in the morning, before the sun had risen. The air was crisp, and a light frost clung to the edges of the trees lining the road. I drove slowly, partly because the road was narrow and partly because I wanted to take in the scenery. It felt like a preview of what was to come. The deeper I went into the forest, the quieter everything became. Birds chirped occasionally, and the wind rustled the tops of the pines, but it wasn't loud enough to mask the sense that I was leaving the world behind. When I finally reached the trailhead, I parked my car and took a moment to look at the forest ahead. The trees were thick, dark, and imposing. The path itself was narrow and uneven, covered in fallen leaves, rocks, and twisted roots. I adjusted my backpack, which I had packed carefully. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, a small stove, a first aid kit, flashlight, and an assortment of knives and tools. I wanted to be prepared for anything because being unprepared in a forest this deep could be dangerous. I had read enough survival stories online to know that a single misstep could lead to serious consequences. I started down the trail, and immediately, the quiet of the forest was overwhelming. No cars, no people, no hum of electricity. Just the sound of my boots on the uneven path and the occasional snap of a twig somewhere off the trail. The further I walked, the heavier the silence became, as though the trees themselves were pressing in around me. The air was damp and smelled faintly of earth and decaying leaves. I felt a strange mix of exhilaration and unease, a creeping sense that the isolation I had sought could be more intense than I had imagined. About 3 hours into the hike, I reached the clearing by the river. It was more beautiful than I had expected, wide, flat ground, the river running swiftly but shallowly, clear water tumbling over rocks, reflecting the late afternoon sun in sharp, bright flashes. I picked a spot for my tent, a slightly raised area to avoid potential flooding if the river rose overnight. I set up the tent quickly, securing it tightly, then unpacked my stove and some food. I wanted to make sure I had something warm before night fell, especially because it was already starting to get cooler. By the time I finished eating, the sun had dipped low behind the trees, and shadows stretched across the clearing. I had my flashlight ready, the batteries fresh, and I had double-checked the stove and my fire-starting supplies. I wanted light, warmth, and the ability to signal for help if necessary. I had my phone, fully charged, but I didn't expect much service this deep in the forest. I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail all day, and I liked it that way. I wanted to be alone, yet the solitude was heavier now, more intense than I had anticipated. Night fell quickly. The forest became a wall of black, the river reflecting only the faint light of the stars above. I lit a small fire near the edge of the clearing, far enough from the tent to be safe but close enough to provide warmth and light. I watched the flames flicker and listened to the river, feeling a strange mix of calm and tension. The forest was alive with sounds. Rustling leaves, snapping twigs, the occasional distant call of an animal. Each sound seemed amplified in the darkness. I kept my flashlight within reach and the knives in my backpack. I had chosen this location partly because it was secluded, but now I realized that seclusion had its dangers too. Around midnight, I woke to a noise. At first, I wasn't sure what it was. Something heavy, moving through the underbrush. I froze, listening. The sound came again, closer this time. A deliberate rustling, the snapping of branches, soft but distinct footsteps. My heart rate increased. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the darkness beyond the clearing. Nothing. I listened again. The sound wasn't consistent. It would pause, then start again, like something or someone was testing my awareness. I realized immediately that I was not just hearing an animal. There was a weight, a carefulness in the movement that suggested something human-sized, moving slowly and deliberately. I stayed still for what felt like an hour, though it could have been minutes. I kept my flashlight on, sweeping the trees, the riverbank, the areas around the clearing. Nothing appeared. I tried to calm myself, reasoning that maybe it was just a deer or a bear, but the sound had a pattern, a deliberateness that no animal I knew could replicate. My chest was tight, my hands clammy, and every instinct told me that the safety I had felt during the day was gone. I decided to remain in the tent, quietly gathering my food, water, and gear inside. I zipped the tent shut and sat against the wall, listening. The rustling didn't come right up to the tent, but I could hear it moving around the perimeter of the clearing, moving with purpose. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that someone could be nearby, someone following the trail I had taken. I checked my phone, no signal, but I had a small whistle in my pocket. Not a lot of protection, but maybe enough to scare someone off. Time passed slowly. The sounds continued sporadically. Sometimes I would hear the snap of a branch far away, sometimes closer, always moving, always deliberate. Couldn't sleep. I could only listen, tense, imagining what could happen if someone came closer. The forest that had felt liberating during the day now felt threatening. Each tree a potential hiding place, each shadow a threat. Around 3 in the morning, I finally heard the sound of footsteps approaching the tent directly. I froze, listening to the crunch of leaves and dirt beneath them. They stopped suddenly, as if the person had realized I was aware. I gripped the whistle, my knuckles white. The footsteps receded slightly, then stopped again, near the edge of the clearing. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I waited. Then the quiet stretched, longer than anything I had experienced before. At dawn, the footsteps had disappeared. The forest was quiet again, and the light of morning revealed the clearing in its true form, beautiful, serene, as though nothing had happened. I carefully unzipped the tent and looked around. There were no obvious signs of anyone being there. No footprints leading to the tent, no discarded items, no disturbed underbrush. The forest looked untouched, but I knew what I had heard. I decided I couldn't stay. I packed up quickly, scanning the surroundings constantly, my adrenaline high. I moved cautiously along the trail, aware of every sound. My legs ached, my back was stiff, but I kept moving, driven by a mix of fear and the need to reach safety. The trail felt endless, the forest thick, the shadows long. I kept my flashlight ready, although the sun was rising, casting the trees in golden light. By mid-morning, I reached my car. I locked the doors immediately and sat inside, breathing heavily. The safety of metal and glass felt surreal after the tension of the night. I drove slowly back towards civilization, constantly checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. I didn't see anyone, but I didn't stop watching until I was on the main highway. Later, after I had returned home and slept for a long, exhausted stretch, I thought about what had happened. I realized that I had been lucky. Lucky to have chosen a clearing that gave me visibility. Lucky that the person didn't try to enter my tent. Lucky that I had trusted my instincts. I never figured out who or what had been in the forest that night, and I never went back. I sold most of my camping gear and limited my trips to areas where other people were nearby. The fear I had felt was real, tangible, and lingering. The forest was no longer a place of freedom. It was a place of constant awareness, where every rustle could be a threat. The lesson I carried was clear. Isolation comes with dangers that no amount of preparation can entirely remove. Even when you think you are ready, even when you have mapped every route and packed every tool, the unpredictability of human presence or intent can turn a peaceful night into something terrifying. I survived, and that survival felt earned, a result of caution, observation, and respect for the unknown in the world around me. I never camped alone again, never in the same way, and the memory of that night in the forest, the tension, the sounds, the sense of being watched, remained with me vivid and clear for years afterward. I never thought a simple camping trip could turn into something so intense, so all-consuming, that it would leave me shaken for weeks afterward. I had always loved being in the woods, the smell of pine and damp earth, the sound of wind through the branches, and the quiet that only comes when you are miles away from roads, houses, or any human noise made me feel alive. I had been planning this particular trip for months, carefully choosing a secluded area in a national forest I had never visited. It was late September, the weather still mild during the day but sharply cold at night. I packed my gear meticulously. A 4-season tent, sleeping bag rated for low temperatures, enough food and water for 4 days, a camping stove, a first aid kit, extra batteries for my headlamp, and a small axe. I made sure my phone was fully charged, though I knew service would be minimal or non-existent. The first day was perfect. I hiked in along a narrow trail that wound through thick pines and birch trees. The sun slanted low in the sky, casting long shadows across the forest floor, making the trunks look darker and the undergrowth more tangled than it really was. Birds called occasionally, and I spotted a deer in the distance, frozen for a moment before it leapt into the trees. I found a clearing beside a small stream where I decided to set up camp. The ground was slightly uneven, but I found the flattest spot I could, cleared away fallen branches and rocks, and pitched my tent. Everything seemed easy, natural, almost routine. I boiled some water, cooked a small meal, and then walked along the stream, feeling the chill creep into my bones as the sun dipped lower. That first night, the forest was alive in a way I had never experienced before. The usual sounds, crickets, rustling leaves, distant owls, were accompanied by something else, a subtle shifting noise in the underbrush that I tried to convince myself was a small animal. I had always known that wildlife could be unpredictable, that bears, mountain lions, and even coyotes could be near campsites, but I reassured myself that I was careful, that I had taken all precautions. I laid in my sleeping bag, flashlight close by, ears straining for every sound, until exhaustion eventually overcame me. The next morning, I awoke to fog clinging to the forest like a thick blanket. Everything looked muted and wet. I drank some water, ate a quick breakfast, and decided to explore a trail that led deeper into the forest. The trail narrowed quickly and became overgrown, forcing me to step over roots and push aside branches. I noticed scratch marks on some trees, vertical, deep, fresh-looking. My stomach tightened. I knew bears could leave marks like that, but the scratches seemed too close together, almost deliberate. I kept moving, trying to reason with myself, telling myself it was nothing unusual, just signs of normal wildlife activity. By midday, I had gone farther than I intended. I realized that the sun was disappearing behind clouds, and the fog made it difficult to estimate distance. I decided to turn back, but as I retraced my steps, I noticed something unsettling. The trail looked different. Trees that I was sure were on one side were now on the other. Rocks that I had passed looked out of place. A creeping sense of disorientation set in, and I started to panic slightly. I tried to remain calm, remembering the compass in my backpack. I checked it, but the dense canopy made the readings unreliable. I kept walking, trying to find familiar markers, but the forest seemed to close in around me. It was then that I heard it, a low, guttural growl, not far from where I stood. My heart jumped, and I froze, listening. There was movement in the underbrush, a rustling, quick and heavy. I had never been close to a large predator, and fear gripped me tightly. I didn't run at first. I tried to assess the situation. The growl came again, deeper this time, and I could hear twigs snapping as something moved closer. Adrenaline surged. I remembered reading that sudden movements could provoke an animal, that standing still and making myself look bigger was sometimes the best defense. But my rational thinking was being drowned by panic. I slowly backed away, my eyes scanning for anything recognizable in the fog. Then I saw it. A large brown shape moving between the trees, at least a few yards away. A bear. My stomach dropped. I knew bears could attack if threatened, or if they were hungry, or if they thought I was prey. I slowly reached for my bear spray, but I realized it was back in my backpack, on the ground somewhere behind me. My only option was to try to get back to the stream, to something familiar, to my campsite. I moved carefully, but the bear followed, tracking my movements. Each step I took made the snapping of branches louder, more urgent. My breathing was rapid, but I tried to keep it quiet. I avoided direct eye contact with the animal, remembering advice I had read about predator encounters. I could hear it sniffing, growling, testing, deciding. The forest felt alive around me, every shadow a potential threat. I stumbled over a root, cursing silently, and that made the bear shift its weight and growl louder. Then, I heard another sound, human footsteps. Someone was coming from the opposite direction, from deeper in the fog. My mind raced. Another hiker? Another camper? But the steps were fast, almost running, heavy and deliberate. The bear's attention shifted slightly, and I realized the human presence might either scare it off or agitate it further. I made a choice. I ran. I ran blindly, crashing through undergrowth, feeling branches slap against my face, tripping over roots, tearing my clothes on thorns. The bear's roar echoed behind me, closer now, and fear became a raw, burning thing in my chest. I ran for what felt like forever, adrenaline pushing me beyond my limits. Eventually, I saw a familiar outline, the stream. I scrambled down the bank and slid into the water, cold and shocking, but it put a barrier between me and the bear. I looked back, barely able to see through the fog and rain, and I caught a glimpse of the bear at the edge of the bank, sniffing the air, its massive head moving slowly. I stayed very still, heart hammering, shivering not just from cold but from the intensity of fear. The bear eventually turned and disappeared into the mist. I stayed in the stream for what felt like hours, too scared to move, listening for any signs of its return. Once I felt confident it had left, I slowly climbed the bank, soaked and exhausted. My campsite was a blur of mud, broken branches, and wet gear. I packed everything as quickly as possible, leaving most of my equipment behind. I couldn't risk staying any longer. By then, it was nearly dark, and the forest was dense. I didn't try to take the trail back. I followed the stream downstream, hoping it would lead to a road or a more open area. Hours passed. I slipped, fell, cut my hands on rocks, and nearly twisted my ankle several times. The water was cold, my clothes soaked through, and fatigue made my mind foggy. I thought constantly about what I would do if another predator appeared. I remembered a tip about making noise to avoid surprising animals, but my voice felt hoarse and useless. I kept moving, counting on sheer determination. Just before dawn, I saw something in the distance, a faint line of trees thinning out, and the glint of a road or a bridge. I pushed harder, driven by exhaustion and hope. When I finally stumbled onto a dirt road, mud-caked and trembling, I realized I had escaped. Within a few minutes, I saw a vehicle approaching. I waved frantically, soaked and dirty, and the driver stopped, giving me a ride to the nearest ranger station. At the ranger station, I told my story. They listened carefully, taking notes, and advised me about the bear activity in the area. They confirmed that the scratches I had seen were indeed from a large male brown bear, likely protecting its territory. They also noted that my choice to move slowly at first, then head for water and try to keep a barrier between me and the animal had probably saved my life. I stayed at the station until it was light, cleaning up and regaining some warmth. They drove me back to a safer, populated area, where I finally felt the grip of fear loosen slightly, replaced by relief and exhaustion. That camping trip changed something in me. I still loved the forest, but I learned a deep respect for its unpredictability and the power of its wild inhabitants. I learned that preparation mattered, but instinct, calm thinking, and sheer perseverance mattered even more. I still hike now, but I carry bear spray at all times, I make noise constantly, and I avoid areas with high predator activity unless I am absolutely certain I am prepared. That day, I survived a terrifying encounter with the raw reality of nature, and the lessons stayed with me, vivid and unforgettable. Even weeks later, I could remember every detail. The fog that obscured everything, the sound of my own heartbeat against the growl of the bear, the smell of wet pine needles, the cold shock of the stream, the endless twisting of roots and underbrush. Every step, every decision, every moment of panic or courage was etched into my memory. I came home with more than just a story. I came home with a respect for the wild that was grounded in reality, a knowledge that survival sometimes depended not just on skill, but on endurance, quick thinking, and a deep awareness of the environment. I would never forget that trip, and I would never underestimate the forest again. I had been planning this camping trip for months. I wanted to escape the city, leave behind the constant noise, the endless lights, and the stress of work. I needed something raw, something that would make me feel alive. So I packed my old, worn-out backpack with all the essentials: a tent, sleeping bag, stove, food, water, extra clothes, a first aid kit, and a small flashlight. I had mapped out a trail I had never hiked before, somewhere deep in the mountains where cell service was weak, and the nearest town was hours away. That was part of the appeal. I wanted to be alone with nature, to push myself, and to experience the kind of isolation that most people avoid. I started my journey early in the morning. The sky was a pale blue, and the sun was just beginning to rise, spilling soft golden light across the hills. The air smelled like wet grass and pine, a mix that made my lungs feel alive. I parked my car at the trailhead, checked my gear one last time, and began walking. The path was narrow, overgrown in places, but clearly used enough to follow without worry. Birds called to each other in the trees, and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush reminded me I was not entirely alone. For the first few hours, everything was peaceful. The trail twisted through dense woods, then opened into small clearings with wildflowers and low shrubs. I paused at one clearing to eat a small snack and drink some water, feeling the tension of city life slowly draining from my shoulders. My legs were sore, but my body felt strong. I noticed a small stream nearby and decided to refill my water bottle. The water was cold and clean, rushing over smooth stones. It was one of those moments where the world feels simple and perfect, the kind of clarity you rarely get in daily life. As I continued, I found a small plateau overlooking a valley. The view was breathtaking, with jagged peaks in the distance and a river threading through the valley below. I stopped for a while, taking in the vastness, letting myself feel small in a way that was humbling but peaceful. I checked my watch. It was late afternoon. I knew I needed to find a good spot for the night soon. The sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows through the trees. I hiked further and found a small clearing that seemed ideal for setting up camp. It was flat, free of rocks, with a few fallen logs I could use for seating. I cleared the area of leaves and twigs, then set up my tent, making sure it was secure and properly staked. I stacked firewood I found nearby, careful to collect dry pieces for the night. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, the forest was bathed in a soft, dusky light. I cooked a small dinner over my portable stove, the smell of rice and beans filling the clearing, and then settled into my sleeping bag, listening to the sounds of the forest around me. At first, the night was quiet in a way that was comforting. The occasional snap of a twig or rustle of leaves reminded me that I was in a living world, not alone. I could hear the distant howl of a coyote, the soft croak of frogs near the stream, the steady hum of insects in the air. I felt a sense of calm, a rare kind that comes from being surrounded by nothing but the natural world. I stared up at the sky through the thin mesh of my tent and could see countless stars, brighter than I had ever seen them in the city. It was mesmerizing, almost hypnotic. Then, around midnight, I noticed something strange. A sound, faint at first, like the crunch of boots on dirt. I froze, straining to listen. The sound was distant, coming from the path that led deeper into the woods. My heart started to beat faster, a primal instinct warning me that something was off. I told myself it was probably just an animal, maybe a deer or a bear moving through the underbrush. but the pattern of the steps felt too deliberate, too steady to belong to an animal. I grabbed my flashlight and slowly unzipped the tent. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the clearing in front of me. Nothing moved. I scanned the trees, the shadows, the edge of the path, but saw nothing. The forest seemed impossibly quiet, almost holding its breath. I told myself again it was probably nothing, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Minutes passed. I tried to calm myself, telling myself I was overreacting, that the isolation and darkness were playing tricks on my mind. But then I heard it again, closer this time. A crunch, a snap, the deliberate rhythm of someone, or something, walking slowly but steadily toward my camp. I swallowed hard, my throat dry, my hands shaking. I knew I couldn't just sit there. I had to think. I grabbed my small pocket knife and my flashlight, trying to make myself appear ready, dangerous even in case whoever or whatever it was came closer. I made myself as quiet as possible, listening. The sound stopped for a moment, then started again, this time circling the clearing. My stomach dropped. This was not an animal. Animals do not move in careful circles around a campsite. I remembered the car, parked less than half a mile away, at the trailhead. The thought of running through the woods at night was terrifying, but staying in the tent was equally dangerous. I decided I had to move, to get out of this place before whoever was out there made their presence known more clearly. I waited for a long moment until I thought the footsteps had moved away, then unzipped the tent quietly and slipped out. The air was cold, biting against my skin. I crouched low and moved toward the path, using the flashlight sparingly to avoid drawing attention. The forest felt enormous, oppressive, and every sound seemed amplified. The rustle of leaves underfoot, the snap of a branch behind me, the distant call of an owl. I forced myself to stay calm, to keep moving in the direction of the trailhead. Halfway there, I saw a faint glimmer of light. My heart leapt. My car. I picked up the pace, moving faster, trying not to trip on the uneven ground. Then I heard it again, a distinct sound this time. Heavy breathing, not animal breathing, human. Panic surged through me. Whoever it was had spotted me, or at least they were close enough to make their presence known. I ran, stumbling over roots and rocks, my backpack bouncing against my shoulders, branches scratching my arms. Finally, I broke through the last line of trees and saw my car clearly in the dim moonlight. Relief flooded me, but I didn't stop. I unlocked the door, threw myself inside, and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely start the engine. Once it roared to life, I didn't hesitate. I drove as fast as I could down the narrow mountain road, keeping the headlights off except for brief flashes to avoid attention. Every turn of the road felt like an eternity, every shadow along the side of the road a potential threat. When I finally reached the main road and turned toward the nearest town, I could feel my pulse starting to slow. My body ached from running, from the stress, from the adrenaline, but I felt safe, finally. I drove until I reached a gas station, where I parked and sat inside, drinking a cold bottle of water, trying to catch my breath. I called the police and reported the incident, though there wasn't much they could do. Looking back, I realized how close I had come to a truly dangerous encounter. It was a terrifying night, one that left a mark on me, a reminder that even in nature, isolation can make you vulnerable. I spent the next few days carefully retracing parts of the trail during daylight, noting areas where someone could hide or follow. I learned a lot about preparation, about trust, and about the thin line between peace and danger in the wild. That night changed the way I approached the outdoors. I still loved camping, still loved hiking, but I never went alone again, never without careful planning, without knowing every part of the trail, without leaving detailed plans with someone back home. I learned to respect the wilderness not just for its beauty, but for its unpredictability. The memory of that night stayed with me, a constant reminder of how fragile safety can be when you are far from help. I still think about it sometimes, the way the shadows moved, the sound of the footsteps, the weight of the darkness pressing in around me. But I also think about what I did right. Staying calm, assessing the situation, moving carefully, and trusting my instincts. That clarity saved me, and in the end, that night terrifying as it was, taught me a level of self-reliance and caution I had never experienced before. I survived, and I came back wiser, stronger, and more aware of the dangers that can exist even in places that seem peaceful. I had planned this solo camping trip for months. The idea of escaping the city, leaving behind the constant noise, the endless emails, and the people who always needed something from me, was a comfort I had been chasing for a long time. I had never gone on a trip like this alone before, but I thought I was ready. I packed my car meticulously the night before. A sturdy tent, a sleeping bag rated for low temperatures, a backpack loaded with dehydrated meals, a first aid kit, a flashlight, extra batteries, a water filter, and a small camping stove. I double-checked everything before leaving. The drive to the trailhead was long and winding. The closer I got to the mountains, the thinner the traffic became. Streetlights disappeared, replaced by tall, dark pines lining the road. The smell of damp earth and pine sap grew stronger. By the time I arrived, the sun was already dipping low behind the ridges, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The few cars that were there seemed abandoned, their owners likely out on hikes like mine. I hoisted my pack onto my shoulders and began the trail. The dirt path was narrow, twisting between ancient trees and over small streams. My legs burned with the first steep incline, but the excitement pushed me forward. Birds chirped in the distance, and the occasional rustle of squirrels reminded me that I wasn't entirely alone. I was aiming for a remote clearing I had scouted on the map, a place far enough from other campers to feel completely isolated. It was supposed to be about a 3-hour hike, and I planned to set up camp before dark. As I walked, the forest became denser. Moss covered the ground, making each step soft but treacherous. Roots snaked across the path, demanding attention to avoid twisting an ankle. Sunlight struggled through the canopy, leaving long streaks of golden light on the forest floor. I noticed that the deeper I went, the quieter it became. Not a sound from the city, not even the faint hum of distant traffic. Just the occasional creak of trees swaying in the breeze. First, it was peaceful, but then I realized how isolated I was. The thought of being alone so far from any help made a small knot of unease form in my stomach. By the time I reached the clearing, it was nearly sunset. I dropped my pack and surveyed the area. It was perfect. Flat ground, surrounded by trees, with a small stream running along one side. I set up my tent quickly, hammering stakes into the soft earth, and laid out my sleeping bag inside. I filtered some water from the stream, careful to boil it before drinking. The sun disappeared, leaving only a dim twilight. I lit a small camp stove and heated a freeze-dried meal. The smell of the food was comforting, familiar, and I ate slowly, enjoying the quiet. After eating, I decided to take a short walk along the stream to stretch my legs. The forest in twilight was different, almost surreal. Shadows stretched in strange ways, and the sounds of nocturnal animals began to stir. I heard a distant snap of a branch, and my stomach tightened. I paused, listening. Nothing moved for a moment, then another snap. I froze again, my heart beating faster. I told myself it was just a deer or a raccoon, normal forest animals. But the snaps were deliberate, closer this time. I quickened my pace back to camp. Once inside the tent, I zipped it up and tried to calm myself. I checked my supplies, my flashlight, and my water, reassuring myself that I was prepared. I crawled into my sleeping bag, but sleep didn't come easily. Every little noise outside made me tense. The wind caused the trees to creak, and the occasional rustle of leaves made my pulse spike. Hours passed slowly. I kept imagining someone watching me from the tree line. I knew it was irrational, but being completely alone in the wilderness made even the smallest sounds seem threatening. Around midnight, the wind picked up. Rain started lightly at first, then heavier, hammering against the tent fabric. I was grateful for the protection of my tent, but the sound was almost hypnotic, blending with my growing unease. I tried to sleep, but kept thinking I heard someone moving around outside. The sound of footsteps crunching on wet leaves. I clutched my flashlight, listening carefully. Then I realized it wasn't footsteps. It was the sound of something dragging across the ground. Slow, deliberate. I froze, holding my breath. The sound circled the tent. My mind raced through every possible scenario. Bear? Mountain lion? Or worse, a human. The thought of a person stalking a lone camper filled me with dread. I reached for my bear spray, keeping it within arm's reach. Hours passed like this. Every small sound made me flinch. At some point, exhaustion overtook my fear, and I managed to drift into a fitful sleep. When I woke, the sky was gray with the early morning light filtering through the tent. Rain had stopped, and the forest was eerily quiet. I unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The clearing was soaked, muddy footprints surrounding my tent. My heart sank. I hadn't seen anyone around yesterday, but the prints were fresh, large, and unmistakably human. Whoever had come by last night had walked in circles, perhaps testing if I was awake. I felt a rush of adrenaline. I knew I had to get out. I packed my gear as quickly and quietly as I could. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch made me flinch. I kept my eyes on the tree line, scanning for any movement. Nothing. The forest was still. I decided to follow the trail back the way I came, moving as fast as the muddy path would allow. My legs were stiff from yesterday's hike, but I pushed myself, adrenaline giving me energy. About halfway back, I stumbled across something that made my stomach drop. A makeshift camp, hastily abandoned. A small fire pit, half-burned wood, and scattered supplies, food wrappers, a sleeping mat, even a partially torn tent. I realized with a chill that whoever had been following me last night had a camp nearby. I had no idea how long they had been there or what their intentions were. My pace quickened. I clutched my backpack straps tightly, scanning the underbrush for any sign of movement. The further I went, the more signs I saw. Broken branches, footprints, and discarded items along the trail. I realized I wasn't alone in this forest. Someone else had been watching, tracking me, and I didn't know why. My mind raced through every possible scenario. I had no weapon besides the bear spray, and my phone had almost no signal. If this person wanted to harm me, I was completely vulnerable. After hours of tense hiking, I finally reached a point where the trees thinned, and the trail opened into a wide gravel road. Relief washed over me. I could see a couple of parked cars in the distance. I ran the rest of the way, waving my arms to signal anyone in sight. A hiker with a dog noticed me and came over, asking if I was okay. I explained, breathless, about the prints and the abandoned camp. He radioed the park rangers, who arrived shortly after. They searched the area where I had camped and found the signs of someone who had been living in the woods for weeks. Apparently, the person had a history of stalking hikers and campers. The rangers escorted me safely back to the trailhead. I sat in my car, exhausted, shaken, but deeply grateful to be alive. They took my statement, checked my equipment, and assured me the area would be monitored. Driving home, the adrenaline finally faded, replaced by a numb relief. I realized that while the wilderness was beautiful, it also carried risks I hadn't fully appreciated. I had survived not because of skill, but because I stayed alert, kept calm, and never underestimated the danger of being completely alone. When I finally reached my apartment, I collapsed on my bed, trembling. I unpacked my gear slowly, taking careful note of every item. I cleaned my equipment, making sure everything was intact. The trip had been terrifying, but it had also taught me the importance of preparation, vigilance, and respecting the unpredictable nature of the wild. From that day on, I decided I would never camp alone in remote areas without letting someone know my exact plans and checking in regularly. Weeks later, I returned to the forest, but this time with a group of friends and proper precautions. We followed marked trails, carried radios, and stayed together. The forest was still beautiful, still serene, but I never again felt the blind fear of being watched and completely alone. The experience had changed me, made me more cautious, more aware, but also more appreciative of the delicate balance between adventure and safety. I learned that surviving in the wilderness wasn't just about knowing how to start a fire or purify water. It was about respecting the environment and the unknown risks that could appear at any moment. The memory of those footprints, of being hunted in the dark, never left me. I replayed the details in my mind, the sound of the dragging steps, the circle of footprints around my tent, the abandoned camp along the trail. But I also remembered how I stayed calm, how I moved quickly, how I reached safety. And that became a source of strength. I realized that fear could be a tool, as long as it didn't paralyze me. I could use it to sharpen my senses, to make better decisions, and to survive. Camping again, even in the same mountains, was never the same. I felt a constant awareness of my surroundings, every rustle of leaves, every shadow across the trail, every crack of a branch. But I also felt capable, prepared, and alive in a way I had never experienced before. The wilderness was beautiful, dangerous, and unpredictable, and I had learned to navigate it, not as a naive adventurer, but as someone who had faced the very real fear of being hunted and had come through it, alive, careful, and wiser. I never found out exactly who had been in the forest, or what their intentions were. The abandoned camp was gone when the rangers checked weeks later. But I no longer needed to. The lesson had been clear. Preparation, awareness, and caution were not just tools, they were survival. And in the wild, those were the only things that mattered. I had been planning the camping trip for months. The thought of being out in the middle of nowhere, away from people and noise, was intoxicating. I wanted to feel the forest in a raw, real way. No trails, no other campers, no distractions. I picked a spot deep in the mountains, one that was known for its dense forests, winding streams, and steep ridges. The kind of place that appeared on maps as a tiny green dot, almost impossible to find unless you knew the area well. I spent weeks studying maps, GPS coordinates, topography lines, and satellite images. I wanted to go alone, fully self-reliant, and test myself in a way I never had before. I packed carefully. A small tent, a sleeping bag rated for low temperatures, a lightweight stove, dehydrated food, water purification tablets, a first aid kit, a compass, a GPS, a flashlight with extra batteries, a multi-tool, rope, and my survival knife. I didn't pack much else. I wanted minimal weight because I would be hiking for hours, sometimes climbing steep ridges, carrying everything on my back. I told myself I was ready for whatever could happen. The hike in was beautiful at first. The trail I followed was faint and overgrown, but it led me to a small stream. The sun was bright, the air crisp, and the scent of pine was sharp and fresh. I stopped several times to take in the surroundings, write a note to myself in my journal about the landscape, the sound of water rushing over stones, and the way the wind rustled the needles in the trees. I made mental notes about animal tracks I saw along the path. Small deer prints, a few squirrel trails, and an area where I could swear a bear had passed a few days before, judging by the tracks and overturned soil. As the day progressed, the trail disappeared altogether. I had to rely on my compass and GPS to navigate. The forest was dense, and the sun started to fall behind the ridges faster than I had expected. I finally found a clearing just before the sun dipped completely below the horizon. It was small, maybe 50 feet across, and surrounded by thick trees. It felt safe enough to set up camp for the night, though I kept thinking about how little protection trees could offer if something went wrong. I pitched my tent quickly, making sure the stakes were secure and the rainfly tight. Even though it wasn't forecast to rain, I knew weather could change fast in the mountains. I collected firewood, dry branches from fallen trees, and built a small fire pit surrounded by rocks. By the time I finished, the last orange glow of the sun had vanished, leaving the forest in a deep blue-gray shadow. The only light came from the weak beam of my flashlight and the small flickering fire I managed to spark. That first night, I felt uneasy, though I couldn't say why. There was no sound of other humans, no lights from distant cars or cabins. Just the wind in the trees, the creak of branches, and the occasional rustle of leaves from small animals. But I kept thinking I heard something heavier, something moving differently than a deer or raccoon. It could have been my imagination, fueled by the solitude and darkness, but it kept me alert. I ate a simple dinner of dehydrated food rehydrated with boiled water, cleaned up, and crawled into my sleeping bag. I stayed awake longer than usual, listening, observing, waiting. The darkness felt oppressive, thick like it had a weight. Around 2 in the morning, I heard it clearly. A snapping branch followed by another. Not small steps, but heavy, deliberate movement, like something large was walking slowly around the edge of my clearing. My heart pounded, but I didn't panic. I had my knife, my flashlight, and my wits. I sat up in my sleeping bag, shining my flashlight toward the sound. The beam passed over trees and shadows but revealed nothing. Then, I noticed movement, barely perceptible, sliding between the trunks. A shadow too large for a deer, too deliberate for a small animal. I froze, straining to hear, my senses stretched. I had only one choice: stay calm and stay quiet. I didn't make a sound. The movement didn't continue in a straight line. It circled my clearing, slow, deliberate. I remembered all the wilderness survival advice I had read. Don't make sudden movements, stay in place, make yourself look large if confronted, keep your fire going. I stayed low, gripping my knife, flashlight angled toward the movement, though I dared not shine it directly in case it provoked whatever it was. The rustling stopped abruptly. Silence. Then, just the wind again. Morning came slowly. The gray light of dawn spilled into the clearing. I unzipped the tent, expecting maybe to see some sign of what had moved in the night. There was a large bear track near the edge of the clearing, the size and depth suggesting a massive male, heavier than I expected for the area. My stomach twisted. I realized I had been close to an encounter with a full-grown grizzly. The sense of relief was immediate and intense, but it was coupled with fear. I checked the surrounding area more carefully, noting broken branches, claw marks on a tree, and disturbed underbrush. I took photos for records, but I felt a cold twinge every time I looked at them. The next day, I continued my hike, trying to stay on less traveled paths. My awareness was hyper-focused. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves, every unusual sound caused my body to tense. I hiked for hours, taking care to keep my camp gear light but ready, ensuring I could quickly climb a tree or defend myself if needed. Water sources were critical, so I carefully planned routes near streams and small ponds. I ate sparingly, mindful that I might need my energy in case I had to escape quickly. By the second night, I found another clearing on a ridgeline. I made the same routine, pitched my tent, gathered firewood, started a fire, and kept my gear within easy reach. The night was quieter this time, but I never let my guard down. Shadows moved differently in the wind, and I noticed how every small animal noise sounded magnified. I slept fitfully, waking often to check the edges of my clearing. When morning came, I felt relief but also exhaustion. I was alone in a remote, untamed area, far from help. Any injury, any misstep could be catastrophic. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. I explored more remote areas, recorded observations of animal tracks, and tested my limits hiking up steep inclines and along narrow ledges. I found evidence of wolves, tracks, scat, and markings on trees. I was careful, moving deliberately and quietly. I stayed aware of weather patterns, cloud movement, wind direction, and terrain that could provide shelter or cover. I realized how unprepared most casual hikers would be in these conditions. Nature was beautiful, but it was indifferent, and it could be cruel if I made a mistake. On the fourth night, something changed. I had set camp near a stream in a densely forested valley. The fire was small but sufficient to cook my food and keep me warm. Around 11 p.m., I heard it again, the heavy, deliberate movement, but this time closer. I froze, heart racing, and turned off the fire to minimize light. The movement circled my tent slowly, and I could hear something sniffing, pawing at dirt. My mind raced through possibilities. A bear? A large mountain lion? Maybe even a human? But the weight and sound suggested a bear. I had learned over the previous nights that panicking was dangerous. I stayed calm, gripping my knife and preparing to use my flashlight only if necessary. Then it charged, or at least I perceived it as a charge. The rustling and thudding of heavy paws moved toward my tent rapidly. I braced, yelling, shining the flashlight directly toward the movement. A huge grizzly burst through the brush, claws digging into the soil. I had nowhere to run in the tight clearing, but I remembered the advice. Stand tall, make noise, make yourself seem large. I yelled, waved my arms, and banged my cooking pot against a rock. The bear froze, growled, and then, after what felt like an eternity, backed off. It circled once more, then disappeared into the darkness. The rest of the night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, listening, watching, preparing for another encounter. I cleaned and packed my gear at first light, realizing I needed to leave this area and head toward lower ground where I could find safer terrain. Every step downhill was cautious. I avoided noisy movements, tested the ground for stability, and kept water and food within reach. 2 days later, I emerged from the dense forest onto a small dirt road, a logging trail. Relief washed over me. Civilization was close enough that I could hear the faint hum of machinery in the distance. I made my way toward the sound, keeping cautious but knowing I was out of immediate danger. By evening, I reached a ranger station. I reported the bear sightings, showed them the tracks and claw marks, and described my journey. They were concerned and warned me about the risks of deep forest camping alone, especially in bear territory. The drive back to my car was surreal. I reflected on every moment. The fear, the adrenaline, the quiet, the beauty of the wilderness, and the constant awareness that I had been completely alone and unprotected at times. The forest hadn't changed. It was still the same place, indifferent, wild, and unforgiving. But I had made it through. I had respected it, observed it, and survived it. By the time I reached my car and drove away from the mountains, I felt a profound mix of relief and humility. I had pushed myself to the limits, seen the wilderness in its rawest form, and come out alive. I knew I would return one day, better prepared, more cautious, and with an even greater respect for the untamed world. That experience taught me that survival depended not on luck, but on awareness, preparation, and respect for the natural order. It was terrifying, exhausting, and humbling, but I had made it through, stronger and wiser than when I had started.